I mean, it's official now. It looks like it came across my phone on the ESPN screen. I'm sure it's up on Detroit Sports Nation already. Matt Quinn and Bob Patricia coming back for the Lions, and it just feels like us Lions fans are being punished for no reason. Uh, whatever you personally may have done in your own life that you might regret. It's still no. The punishment doesn't fit the crime if you're a Lions fan. We'll just put it that way. Before we get started into why God has forsaken us, I do, of course, want to go ahead and give a shout out to our Sports Carnage podcast. If you don't know me, I'm Ryan. I've been on Detroit Sports Nation, Sports Carnage, doing these videos for a while. So if you haven't checked it out, hit the link in the description right there. And then just follow us on our platforms and then go ahead and listen. I'm sure we'll discuss this on definitely future podcasts. We got a bowl mania going on tonight. So a lot of fun stuff. But let's get into stuff that, of course, is not fun, which right now is going to be our Detroit Lions retaining Bob Quinn and retaining Matt Patricia with 2 games left in the regular season. And right now they only have 3 wins. And there's no evidence to suggest or even support why Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn should be coming back to me. So, let's kind of start right there. As far as the organization goes, I don't think there is one thing that you can point to either Bob Quinn or Matt Patricia that they do particularly well, right? It's Bob Quinn's job to not only draft players and put the players on the roster in positions to succeed. And it's also his job to hire a competent coaching staff. So if you're going to break it down kind of by, his main things on his job description, you start with the draft. And the biggest red mark of Bob Quinn's drafting resume is that he really has no idea how to identify value and how to really just identify talent. So if you look at just his first-round pick since he's been here, he picked Taylor Decker, who sucks. He picked Jared Davis, who sucks. Frank Ragnow, who was a good pick, especially at 20. You're able to get just kind of an impact center and a mainstay on your offensive line. And then TJ Hawkinson, who even if he's a good player, it goes back to the value. You don't take a tight end that high. But, I'm sure you guys have heard of all the discussion of the drafts, but this is also a man who drafted Jelani Tavai in the second round, again, where nobody had eyes on him in the second round. He drafted Tease Tabor in the second round, who was cut off the team in, 2 or 3 years since being picked. And then, he's not – and then, even with the Quandre Diggs trade, you give away Quandre Diggs for really no reason. You get only a 5th-round draft pick in return. And he did bring in Snacks Harrison here for a 5th round. So if you look at his draft history and, his draft resume, his draft worksheet for you, it's terrible. And that's not something that's exciting, especially when you have a chance to have a top 5 pick. Now, hopefully they stumble into the number 2 pick, and then it's a no-brainer. You take Chase Young, and nobody in the world can mess that up. But if the Lions start getting down 4-5, I think you have to have a real suspicion that he's going to mess it up, right? As opposed to giving it to somebody new and letting them kind of craft their vision for the future. At least I don't trust Bob Quinn with any pick higher than like 3 or really 2. I figure he might mess up the 3rd pick too. Bryce, all I want for Christmas is for the Fords to sell. Well, that's not going to happen. I know they had reports about Martha meeting with Jeff Bezos or something, but then if you were on Twitter today and kind of monitoring social media, which is what I have to do for here, obviously, you heard some people come out and just say, yeah, that's not true at all. Shane says it's a good move to keep them another year. I highly disagree with that, Shane, but I'd be very interested to know kind of why you feel that way. Secondly, as far as Bob Quinn's job description goes, because we kind of got lost there, putting the right coaches in place. I don't think Matt Patricia is a good coach. I don't think Matt Patricia has done a good job. And if I'm reading from the ESPN article, it says that they brought them back, and then the clear expectation next year is to make the playoffs. Now, it doesn't say that there's an ultimatum, of course, but that kind of seems to be, at least to me, what is implied by the wording of it. Martha Ford told a group of reporters, we expect to be a playoff contender, and those are our expectations. And we've expressed that to both Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia. And then I think it was Bob. Oh, here it is. From Sheila Ford, who is Martha's daughter and then vice chairwoman for the Lions, says that would have been the popular choice, meaning to dump Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, the popular decision. And we knew that, but I say, but what I say is that we're doing what is right for the organization. And then finally, Matt Patricia said that this is a process. I know there's a lot in play here that we're going through, and we're trying to build, and we're trying to do the best we can to improve and get better. What did Bob Quinn say? And then Bob Quinn mentioned something. I just has quotes. It's always hard to judge and say. Nope, that's still Patricia. Gotta hate Patricia. So I think all those things we look for are signs. Patricia will now receive a third. I cannot find Bob Quinn's quotes, but they're in there somewhere. Essentially, they're preaching patience and how this was going to be a rebuild from the jump, which is obviously not what we were sold, right? We were sold that 9-7 wasn't good enough. So if you're talking about the playoff or the expectation next year should be the playoffs. Well, the playoffs should have been the expectation as soon as Matt Patricia came in here. If you're saying, no, 9 wins isn't good enough, that's going to mean that the expectations are 10 wins and above, which, even through his first 2 seasons total combined, Matt Patricia hasn't been able to mark up 10 wins. So when you sit there talk about expectations and how you need to move better moving forward, it also kind of sounds like it's an empty threat talking about, hey, it's clear that our expectations are to be in the playoffs. Well, I mean, no shit, right? You obviously want to make the playoffs, but you have a coach that, and this kind of even ties back into Bob Quinn and putting the players and like the right roster around him. But you have a coach who, you can say what you want about former players being disgruntled or whatever, but there's a lot of guys that have played for the Lions that came out and said, Matt Patricia is absolutely not. We didn't like him as a coach, basically. None of them really said that he was a bad coach, to be fair. But most of it was just, he came in and he kind of he demanded respect that he didn't necessarily command or that he didn't earn, he didn't deserve, whatever the case was. And that caused a lot of tension in the locker room. And then, if you believe the Quandre Diggs kind of whisperings of the reason that they got rid of Quandre Diggs after giving him an extension is because he wasn't happy with the way things were going with the coaching staff. He wasn't happy, obviously, with the way the defense was progressing. And, he shouldn't have been because they're like bottom 3, bottom 4, something like that in the NFL right now. And that's not, to me, it's kind of mind-boggling that that's a guy that you end up hitching your wagon to. A guy who the players don't seem to like. And again, I know there are former players who are mad they were cut, whatever the case is. And maybe it's just because we're in Detroit and I haven't kept up on all the coaching and the former players, what they say in other cities. But, following the NFL with a fairly close eye, I can't remember a coach off the top of my head who's still coaching who more former players have come out and just said, basically, this guy is a garbage can, right? We don't like to play for this guy. He came in, we liked the other coach, and this guy came in and instead of, understanding that and understanding those relationships and then working to build that respect, he just came in and thought he would have it right away. And that's not the case. We don't like him as a coach. We don't like the way he practices. We don't like kind of where he puts us. And this was before. And I think even Kyle Van Noy said something, and I think that was still when Bob Quinn was here. Not Matt Patricia, but Kyle Van Noy basically said the coaches have to know what they were doing. I think that was Quinn and Caldwell. That may have been before Quinn too, so I don't want to put that necessarily on him. Dave Barnhill says that this better be the last year. If there is no better results, fire them. If I say it will be the same team as last year, so I won't watch or go to a game. Well, I mean, they're obviously going to be better next year, right? Which it also kind of feels like it's a cop-out. You don't just want to say, hey, the Lions have to get better. They have 3 wins, right? They're going to have a top 3 or top 4 pick in the NFL draft. So if your only goal is to get better, then to me, that's unacceptable. Because, you only won so few games, of course, because Matthew Stafford got hurt. Now, Stafford played, how many games do you win anyway? Probably 7 or 8. maybe you get to 9 or 10, but you're still probably about a 7 or 8 win team, which is not good. It's not effective. It's not going to get you into the playoffs. Whatever word you want to use and whatever expectations you have, 7 to 8 wins and even a healthy Matthew Stafford on this year's team is not giving you that, because Matthew Stafford's not going to go out there and make the defense any better. So as far as just getting better and let's give them more time to get the roster better, I mean, next year they're going to look better no matter what, right? They won 3 games this year. You have more fingers on your hand. I hope so. Most of you probably have more fingers on your hand than the Lions have wins this year. My man Evan Sharon, shout out to you, Evan. It's the 3rd time is the charm, right, Ryan? I hate that. It's, of course, alluding to Matt Patricia's 3rd year that he's going to get next year. Defensive guru who just makes the defenses worse wherever he goes. And now New England's defense is out there thriving without him. So good for them. Of course, obviously bad for us. That's the most frustrating part is what you were sold, all the good stuff about Matt Patricia and how he's so smart and how the defense was going to, be so much better. We're going to be a more disciplined team, the quote unquote Patriot way. That is absolutely none of what you've gotten. The Lions still commit stupid penalties seemingly every week. Their defense has been way worse than it was under Caldwell and Terrell Austin. And Matt Patricia, there are calls that you see during games, particularly this year in the, I think it was the Arizona game, where the Lions, they called the timeout before Stafford was able to convert the 3rd down play or whatever that would have given them the outright win, as opposed to, having them go into overtime and tying. And there are just other clock management situations that you've seen Patricia fumble. So for a guy who's really smart, a guy who's a rocket scientist, that's, definitely not translating over to on the sideline. It's not translating over into the locker room. As we said, it really sounds like he has a problem building relationships with his players. Zach says, if you were Bob Quinn, who would you draft? I mean, if you get him, Chase Young, if you're able to sneak in a number 2. Otherwise, I'm probably picking Simons, whatever the hybrid, linebacker safety guy is from Clemson, or Jeffrey Okudah from Ohio State, the cornerback, who I think is really, really good. But if Bob Quinn doesn't draft either of those guys, I won't be sad, because there's a lot of talent at the top of the draft. And like I said, it'll be hard to mess it up, but if there is anyone who can mess up that draft pick, you can bet your bottom dollar it would be Bob Quinn. Jim Bob says, in their defense, the injuries this year have been absolutely ridiculous. It's hard to win when the roster has changed so much this season. It sounds like a Bob Quinn burner account. But as far as that, Jim Bob, and I do appreciate the comment, I mean, everybody in the NFL gets hurt, right? And it's easy to look at other teams who miss players, who had players leave, who had players hurt, and say they're way better than the Lions. They're just better organizations in total, but that does start from ownership. That goes down to GM and goes down to coaching. So if you took a similar situation like Pittsburgh, who they're 8-6 right now, I think, and right in the playoff hunt, they lost Ben Roethlisberger, they lost Mason Rudolph, who's their backup quarterback, similar to the Lions, right, who lost Stafford and Driscoll, and now they have Duck Hodges, and they're still winning games. They also lost Le'Veon Bell, they lost Antonio Brown. I think Juju was hurt for a couple games near the end too. I don't know if he's back yet, but James Conner went out too. So they had impact player after impact player go down. And it really hasn't been an excuse for them. And of course, the Steelers are a million times better organization than the Lions, kind of ever praying or hoping to be. But yeah, I mean, you even look at a team like Carolina, who's looked better this year with Cam Newton going down than the Lions did when Stafford. So the Lions definitely win more games with Stafford, but I think it's kind of it's more of an admonishment on Bob Quinn for losing Matthew Stafford, because it showed you the deficiencies in the roster that he was able to build around Stafford. Because obviously Quinn inherited Stafford. Quinn didn't have anything to do with getting Stafford on the team or making Stafford the player that he's been. He was already there. He was a mainstay, and Quinn just decided to keep him. So you kind of already have a one-up when you have a quarterback that high of a level, waiting for you on your first day. And then same with Matt Patricia. And then just the roster that they put around Stafford. Once Stafford went down, you saw, you kind of saw more of what Bob Quinn was, and the players and the talent that he's evaluating and bringing in. You saw all the deficiencies that they have, and how for the past, ever since they lost Matthew Stafford, for the past 11, 12 weeks, whatever it is, how they just don't look like even an NFL team. Zach says, will our old man defensive coordinator be back next year? Hope not. Probably not. Pasqualoni probably ends up being the fall guy. As far as this regime goes, it'd be Michigan State levels of just frustration for me and embarrassment if everybody on the Lions staff ended up coming back. But I do expect Pasqualoni to be let go. But, I mean, if you would have asked me 4 weeks ago, I would also said that Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia were in no way coming back, which is another reason why this hurts so bad. Because, for ever since the last few days and just listening to the radio and kind of, just viewing it on social media, I really thought Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn were gone, especially if the Lions lost out the rest of their games. I thought there's no way you can bring these guys back, Bob Quinn for a 5th season and Matt Patricia for a 3rd season, coming off of a 3-win team or coming off of a 3-win year. And then probably the last 4 or 5 days or so, you just start hearing things where, these it's essentially kind of signs of backing from the organization where they're happy with the job that they've done. You had Matt Patricia joking in the press conference about, oh, I just stay here because if they cut my key card off, then I won't be able to come back in, or whatever dumb shit he said. But you start to hear that, and then you start to just feel like they're getting more comfortable with them, and that they've already had the conversation of, hey, these guys are coming back. 0-16 next year if we get the current team that has no heart and passion. I don't they're not going to go 0-16. That's unheard of, obviously not for us, but typically unheard of in the NFL. And then with Matthew Stafford as your quarterback, assuming that he comes back and he's able to even play 10 games, God forbid he gets hurt next year, the Lions will end up winning a game. So I'm not concerned about over 16. I do sort of agree about the heart and the passion thing, though, which is another thing that kind of irked me in this ESPN write-up that they said about the Lions retaining Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia. They had a quote in here from Patricia where he says, I would say I'm always encouraged by the way that the team right now fights every single week. I'm encouraged by some of the players that I see out there improving and getting better and playing more consistent. And even some of the players that have been forced into action because of whatever circumstance, maybe showing in a positive way. To me, that's wild to say that you're encouraged by the way that your team fights every single week after they just gave up 800 passing yards to Jameis Winston. They were in that game late, obviously, and then they just got blown out. And then even the Lions losing to really bad teams, they lost to the Bears. They lost to the Vikings, aren't a really bad team, but the Lions still lost to them. And just losing, 10 games in a row now, I think. And you're over here talking to your team or talking with your team about, I just love all the fight that we've showed. Let's see how many losses here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 losses in a row because they ended up beating the Giants. So losing 7 games in a row and then just talking about, you're happy about your team's fighting and performance in those games. To me, it's a pretty ridiculous claim. And I know the Lions have led in most of those games at least. But, I mean, if you get up 7-0 or 14-13 and then you lose 24-14, that doesn't really mean that you fought in the game. It means you were up probably in the first half, and then the second half, or whatever the case is, you got shut out. And to me, that doesn't show a whole lot of heart. And I'm not even sitting here questioning, of course, whether the players play hard or not. But it kind of goes back to what we talked about of the, of former players coming out and not sounding like they particularly liked playing for Matt Patricia. And then if we go back to the Steelers player or the Steelers, for example, the Steelers play harder. In my estimation, they play harder for Mike Tomlin than the Lions do for Matt Patricia. Vegas says 9-7 is not a winning team. So basically we should all get ready and know we need to rebuild. We're going to need patience to build from a 9-7 team. I don't know if he's trying to quote Bob Quinn from his presser when he fired Jim Caldwell and said 9-7 wasn't good enough. But, we're not even building from a 9-7 team right now. We built from a 9-7 team, and then we fell all the way down to 3-10-1. And obviously, right, or 3. 11-1. No, 3-10-1. Sorry. 3-10-1. And I mean, obviously, again, part of that is Stafford being hurt, but they went from 9 wins to they have last year 6 wins. And then this year, I don't think they're going to beat the Packers in the last game. They have a chance to beat the Broncos. I wouldn't bet on it. So you're going from, 9 to 6 to 3 or 4 wins. And again, it's just constant, steady regression. And that's huge regression too. 3 games. Like, you only play 16 in the NFL. That's essentially 1/5 of your season every year that you're just cutting off and losing more games. So maybe if they do follow that trend, whoever said, I think it was Vega, who said they'll go 0-16. Oh, it was David. But if they continue that trend, they might end up going 0-16. Ryan says, you can't give a coach 1 year to sink or swim. It takes time. Nothing happens overnight, especially in Detroit. Well, he's had 2 years right now, and he sank them both. And that's the argument that, you hear a lot is you have to give these guys time. You can't just keep switching coaches every year. My counterpoint to that is if the coaches are bad and you know that they're bad, you can. You want to cut bait first if you think that you have a bad coach or if your coach isn't effective, if you can't coach, whatever reason you want to give why this man should not be coaching an NFL team, why he shouldn't be coaching in professional football ranks at all. Whatever your reason is, and it's a valid reason, to me, you cut bait before you give them the 3 or 4 year buffer. Because if it's clear that they can't do it, there's no time in just sitting there and watching them fail, right? If you have an employee and on the first month of the job, they just don't show any type of improvement, how long are you going to give them? Are you going to let them stay for 3 months and just have 2 months constantly of taking a paycheck and not bringing any value to the company? Or are you going to axe them when you figure out, hey, it's not a good fit for us and it's not a good fit for you? So for me, I'd rather cut bait with the coach than, hey, let's just give them 3 years and hope to God for whatever reason they can go 12-4 next year and then everything's, hunky-dory. There's a lot of Lions are losers comments. Of course. Tommy says there's no accountability whatsoever, but they sell tickets and pay for the old bags sunglasses. That's pretty funny. And they are selling tickets. They'll sell tickets next year because, they've gotten better at selling hope. Except I don't know so much now. I've obviously been a Lions fan all of my life, and there's, of course, been some pretty low points there. But as far as just the entire fan base borderline checking out of the season, and again, once September rolls around in October, August, and football is starting to, kind of reach the fever pitch of, hey, it's our year, anything can happen, it might totally change, and this point might just sound stupid. It might be the worst thing I say during this whole video. But to me, it seems like the Lions fans are at an all-time high point of we just don't care about this team, and we don't want anything to do with this team as far as the current, as far as the current structure is there, and then them bringing them back with 2 games remaining on the schedule. I'd be interested to see kind of what the let's see, both of the final game with the Packers coming into town. I'd be interested to see the attendance for that game and see kind of what's the ratio to green jerseys in the stadium as opposed to the Honolulu Blues, because the game would probably sell well because it's the Packers fans. They're able to cross over and come to Detroit. But that's a game I'm interested to see kind of where the support lies for there, because next week the Lions are on the road, so we won't know. But as far as like even TV ratings, radio ratings, and attendance, that's kind of what I'm going to be looking for to see if that helps my point at all, or if I just look stupid, which I might. Tim says, should we trade Darius Slay for draft picks? Draft Okuda in the first round. What do you think? I think Darius Slay will be traded. And it's probably a good move because he seems like one of those guys. And we've mentioned it a couple times. We've rehashed the players who don't seem like they like playing for Matt Patricia, or who don't necessarily agree with the way the defense is going, the way the team is being built. It's kind of whatever you want to say. Darius Slay seems like one of those players to me, and that's not a knock on Slay, obviously. But if you've monitored, and this is mainly just off like his reaction to the Quandre Diggs trade, and him and Quandre were obviously boys, and it's not somebody that he wanted to see go. But just some of his some of his like social media activity since the trade, it seems a little bit more petty than the Lions probably like. And he had the whole comments about it doesn't really matter if I get traded because I'm going to ball wherever I go. Something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing there, but to me, it sounds like Darius Slay expects himself to get traded in the offseason or, before his contract's up and he tries to sign an extension. And that is what I expect to happen. And I wouldn't be mad, obviously, if they drafted Okudah in the first round. The only way I'd be mad is if they passed up on Chase Young. Petey Pablo, 15-year season ticket holder. It's over. Yeah, that's another thing I'm interested to see next year is how many season tickets, they end up selling as opposed to how many they sold this year. Because, like I said, it seems like that just the fanfare for this team is at an all-time low. And it's fans that have lived through a Matt Millen extension. It's fans who have lived through 0-16. They had the paper bags on their head, the whole thing. And it seems, it's definitely the worst since then. And right now, because they had just the slightest taste of, if you want to call it success, you can, just because it's more success than we had. But, you had Schwartz, you had Caldwell, and they made the playoffs, 3 out of 5 years, who, that's not even really good if you're, the wild card essentially every other year, and then you always lose in that wild card game. But it was at least something for Lions fans to get excited about, especially, when you had the next year after losing in that wild card year. And then you say, okay, now this year's the year that we step up and win the division. For here, if you pick the Lions to win the division next year, then absolutely God bless your soul. And I'd love to hear your reasoning for that. Evan says, it does hurt to see them back, but I did expect it from Martha to claim being a playoff contender in 2020. That's obvious. We need to be better, and we deserve even better. Yeah, we definitely deserve better than 3 wins from our team. And again, I hate the mantra of, next year is going to be the year that decides it for them if they make the playoffs or not. Because why? No, I just is kind of what's the point in that? I don't like what about them makes you think that they can make the playoffs? If you're giving essentially an ultimatum to somebody of make the playoffs or be fired, you at least have a little bit of confidence that they have the potential and that they have, the right way, the right direction to make the playoffs. And I don't think that the Lions have that recipe. I don't know that is in Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia's wheelhouse to put together a team that's going to compete for the division and compete for the playoffs. One, not only just on a talent building roster or talent building aspect, which Bob Quinn has shown that he's at least so far incapable of doing, and he's had 4 years to build a talented roster, and of course that has not worked out. But even just Matt Patricia, again, like the players fight or giving that extra effort for Matt Patricia, where you see the teams who win 12, 13 games, they like fighting for their coach, right? They're able to scratch out some of those victories in the end, and the Lions have lost a lot of close games. And with the parity in the NFL, will some of those games shift over to where, they're not blowing leads late? You would have to think that it would, as opposed to, regression to the mean. It'd be progression to the mean, where you're not losing every single one of those games, and then you start to win a couple. But, I do have a real concern about, just how much the players are fighting for their coach. Obviously both in the locker room, but on the field as well, which you need if you're going to go ahead and make a run in the playoffs and win a division, which, obviously we haven't seen, but the closer we've gotten to it, at least with the past few coaches, they're coaches that, at least the players liked, and they had that going for them. And then this regime does not seem like that's the case. Injuries, all we need to know, let the man build the team. Well, the man has tried to build the team, and the man has failed to build the team. So we've tried Mr. John Oliver. That is a great name, though, by the way. But, again, it's not something I think you can just blame on injuries, because every team, from one reason or another, has suffered from injuries. And, the good teams have been able to bounce back, and the bad teams have not. And the Lions, being a bad team, were not able to overcome any of the injuries. And the good teams, again, like the Steelers, were able to, at least keep themselves in the hunt now. And even if the Steelers finish, 8-8 and 9-7 and miss the playoffs, right? It's still a better job. That's still a season where you can probably look back on and say, okay, we did a lot of really nice things considering all the injuries that we had. It'd be different right now if the Lions were 6-10, and then you said, no, if we had Stafford, maybe we win 4 more games and we're at 10-6, and then we're in the playoffs. So there's a difference between being a really injured team that only wins 3 games and only wins 6, right? Because if you're an injured team that wins 6 or 7 games, what probably happened is you just didn't have the talent to win those games. But your team fought hard. You had some players break out, next man up type of mentality where it was easy to go ahead and pinpoint, okay, that guy's going to be a mainstay on this team for the next couple of years, especially if he keeps playing like this. That's a future starter for us. I don't really know that there's anyone on this Lions team that you can really say that about. Tavai hasn't looked bad from for being a very highly scrutinized second round pick. Bo Scarborough, as good as he's looked at times, I don't think that's a starting running back in the future. If you can keep him on your team, he's never been able to stay healthy. Him and Kerryon, so needs to have 2 wildly injured running backs. But even Bo Scarborough, that's not like an every down back that you saw. It's somebody where he came in and he played well for the Lions for however many games that he was able to start. But at the same time, you're not getting those guys in the future where it's just kind of clear that they're really the future of the team. Well, if they would have sent the talent scout like the Patriots do, never mind, the defense still wouldn't have stopped anyone. Well, maybe the Lions should start cheating. If Quinn and Bob Patricia, if Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia do come from the Patriots, they should know how to film those sidelines and give us any advantage that we have. I don't care if we have to cheat. If we can get into the playoffs and still win the division, that's what I want. And as far as Lions scuttle, but yeah, that's thank you guys for letting me get all this off my chest. It's very therapeutic to see or to discuss and kind of figure out why the Lions feel like torturing so many of us, so many times for so many years, thoroughly, and then just the different ways that they're able to do it are really remarkable. If you looked at any other team that had that was coming off of a 3-win year by losing their last 11 games. So, you weren't the Dolphins who started off 0-8 and then won like 3 or 4 games or something like that, where again, you start to progress at the end of the year. That is not what's happened at all, even a little bit. I hate, Larry Polk says, I hate they keeping them, but I'm happy that they're staying healthy. Oh, okay. Or I hate that they're keeping them, but I'm happy that they're staying. I don't think that makes any sense, Larry. I hate that they're keeping them, but to me, that's wild. I hate that they're keeping them, and that of course means that I hate that they're staying. Because I just don't think they're good at their jobs. I'm sure they're both nice people. It's just like, what are you bringing to the table that could possibly constitute another year of building a team, another year of drafting, an entire draft class essentially, and then another year of trying to get players for a system that has proven not to work. And that's where you have to really be concerned about the future outlook of the Lions, where I don't know that anybody in here thinks that they're going to be a playoff team next year. I know I certainly don't. They do play a last place schedule, but you have to keep in mind that all of those other teams playing those last place schedules, as much as you can look at the Lions schedule and think like, oh, Jacksonville, that's a guaranteed win. The Jaguars are looking at their schedule like, oh, the Lions, yep, there's a guaranteed win too. So there's no guarantee, obviously, that you win all of those games. So if you're playing a last place schedule, it means that you yourself are really a bad team. And those teams that you're counting on wins against, you're one of those teams, so you can't be doing it. So as far as the Lions, if they don't make the playoffs, and that's kind of where that point goes, So that goes to say if the Lions don't make the playoffs and it is an ultimatum type situation where Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia are indeed let go, which I think is more likely to happen than the Lions making the playoffs, even as a wild card or winning the division, hosting a playoff game, whatever it is. Then you have another year of draft prospects that the new GM after Bob Quinn, right, that they didn't pick up, and they're going to want to build a team in their image. They're not going to want to keep, kind of all of the bad pillars that Bob Quinn has laid. And with Matt Patricia's weird system that he runs on defense, we refuse to rush more than 3 guys. If you're bringing in a new coach, you have all of these players and all of this roster for a system that essentially just doesn't fit now what they want to do. And then what you're doing is you're prolonging the rebuild and you're giving the other guy or the guy after you. And I know Bob Quinn isn't worried about this. This is just me as a fan perspective worried about it. But you're giving the guy after Bob Quinn, because I think after next year there will be a guy after Bob Quinn. You're giving him essentially nothing to start with, right? Stafford at that point will be basically a whole year older than he is right now. Obviously we don't know about his health, and he'll be kind of on the final years of his contract, or maybe even the final year, which that could be good for them. It could also obviously be bad if Stafford's somebody that you end up, flipping for draft picks or whatever it is. But with Bob Quinn drafting, and they mentioned this on the radio, and it's something that is just kind of pretty obvious. And you've heard it before from GMs, or you've heard it before around the conversation of general managers who are trying to save their job. Right? They're not drafting for what's best, the long-term future of the team. They're drafting for how can we get the most help immediately right now, which if you're in the camp of me and you don't think that the Lions are going to make the playoffs, so you think, they're going to get players that aren't best for their long-term future, and then they're just going to bring in a whole new system that's going to delay your rebuilding process, that's going to delay, how good you can be, how fast. And that's one of the reasons why, at least, of course, from a fan perspective, I think that the Lions should have cut bait with Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, because they're not good at their jobs. And now, because they're not good at their jobs, if you give them an ultimatum, it affects the way that they're doing business, because they don't care about the Lions' success if they're not a part of the Lions. So they're going to do everything that they can, even if it means, God forbid, burning assets or passing over players in the draft who are going to be better for the team long term, for a guy that can make more of an immediate impact today. Obviously what happens is once Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn are then gone, then your team's essentially screwed, because you got all these players who aren't fitting the development of the team moving forward. And Matt Patricia, I almost did it again. And Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn are operating essentially out of a place of panic, instead of a panic and kind of perseverance, survival, as opposed to having a clear head of what is the best thing moving forward. The Lions have been rebuilding since '57, absolutely been. Yeah. It's a terrible misery being a Lions fan. Luckily, I haven't been around since '57, but I've been around plenty to understand kind of what's gone in to the last 70 years of not winning a playoff game. If Joe Burrow is on the board, do you draft him? David, if Joe Burrow is on the board, I draft him myself. But that goes back to what we just said about Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia playing for survival, and trying to preserve their jobs and not doing what's best for the future. I don't think there's any chance that Joe Burrow is on the board when the Lions draft, but if for some godforsaken reason that he is, and you have that franchise quarterback changing piece that you can get in your organization, that is a move that I think the Lions do end up passing up, because Joe Burrow doesn't help the Lions at all in the short term. Right? You're not going to start Joe Burrow and make the playoffs. You're going to sit Joe Burrow behind Matthew Stafford. And then even, next year, just with the talent we've seen around Stafford and with the pieces that we've seen, we saw how they performed this year. around Stafford. Even with Stafford, they were 3-4-1, 3-5-1, depending on how you want to mark the game that he ended up starting and then not playing. Regardless, they were less than a 500 team. And if you go less than 500, you're not going to make the playoffs. So either way, I think they pass on Joe Burrow, which would make me very sad if they got in this hypothetical situation where they're able to draft him. I think they would prioritize themselves over the team. Wayne says, I think Quinn is nice at scouting, but Matt wasn't a good defensive coordinator to begin with, so head coaching going to take him a minute. I don't think Quinn is good at scouting at all. If you've looked even just at his drafts with the Lions, there's really no impact players that he's picked. The two you could argue, and again, everybody from this year's draft class, Tavai Hawkinson, Mari Anunoue, the cornerback from Penn State, whoever, Willie Harris. Those are guys, since they were just drafted, you do have to have a wait and see approach for them. But the two impact guys that you could argue that he's drafted are Frank Ragnow and then Kenny Golladay. And again, Ragnow is still, Ragnow's on the offensive line. Offensive line is very important. It hasn't, Frank Ragnow hasn't changed the game for the Lions. He's just, hopefully going to be a cog moving forward. But, he drafted guys with injury history and then didn't really back them up with guys at their position. So, drafting a guy like Kerryon Johnson, but only having Ty Johnson and Bo Scarborough as backups, Bo Scarborough as backups, because, you had C.J. Anderson, who you ended up cutting after, was it 2 weeks or something like that? And then you drafted, you didn't draft a quarterback behind Stafford, who could potentially, like Dwayne Haskins was available for the Lions last year. And they passed on him, which you kind of knew they would, but at some point too, you still do have to start thinking about the future. And it doesn't really seem like Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia have been good at scouting what the future of the Lions is going to entail. Like if you're a proponent of bringing back Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, God bless you. Obviously, we disagree, but my biggest question for that would be, what have they done in the past? Patricia 2 years. And Bob Quinn 4 years. What have they done that gives you hope for a better future? Because to me, that's a better argument than just, hey, you have to give them time. If you're able to provide really any evidence at all that, hey, they've been able to draft these players, or they've been able to implement this system and has worked out X, Y, and Z, if there are any points besides, hey, you just have to get them more time because they might figure it out. If you're able to provide any evidence at all as to why it would be a good idea to keep Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, I would be absolutely all ears for that. But the way I look at it is there's a mountain of evidence against Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, and then the only argument for keeping Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn is, hey, they might figure it out. But if you're just going to go with they might figure it out argument, you might as well hire somebody new, because you found out that these guys at least already haven't been able to figure it out. And it doesn't look like they're planned for the future, based on, again, their drafting, based on even just signings that they've made. It doesn't seem like they have a good frame of reference for how they're able to turn the ship around eventually. So if you're going to go with they might just figure it out argument, hire somebody new who himself, they might just figure it out. Paul Kowalski, I've said since the season started falling apart, give Patricia one more year, and I wanted them to keep Caldwell. I didn't want them to keep Caldwell. That's another thing, too, that I've heard is, don't you wish you had Caldwell back? No. Dylan, who's on our Sports Carnage podcast, made that argument as well. Just because you wanted one guy gone who you didn't think was doing a good job, and I had different issues with Caldwell than I have with Matt Patricia. But if you have one guy who's not doing a good job and you say, hey, get out of here, and then you bring in a new guy and he does even a worse job, it's not wrong of you to still want the dude who is doing a slightly better job than the guy who's doing a terrible job to not want to work there anymore. You know what I mean? Like you can say Jim Caldwell was bad, Matt Patricia's even worse, but that doesn't mean you want to go back to Jim Caldwell, right? You just want a good coach. You want somebody who's better than Patricia. You want somebody who's better than Caldwell. And because Caldwell is better than Patricia, that does not mean that the Lions should apologize or anything like that for firing him. David, nothing. It's time for them to carry Martha's baggage out the stadium doors and take her along with them, sell the team. I don't think there's any chance at all that Martha Ford sells the team. Ben says, I don't see why it took so long. Matthew Stafford just placed on IR. Aha, so that's what he's referring to. Yeah, I don't know why either. If they brought Stafford back, and I actually said this on one of our podcasts, if they brought Stafford back, that would have been the worst move that I could ever remember the Lions doing. And again, we've been alive through 0-16. We've been alive through every dumb coaching decision that they've made. If the Lions were to, for whatever reason, put Matthew Stafford back in shoulder pads and throw him back out on the field, that might have signaled the death of the franchise for me. I don't think, because that would have been unforgivable. So it's also interesting, and I will say this, as far as this year goes, the Lions have done, since the season started bottoming out and they were losing all of those games, and then they had a clear path to like a top 3 pick. In that aspect, they've checked all of those boxes right as you could do it from a fan perspective, right? If you wanted the Lions to lose out, like I did, I came on one of these videos and said I'm on the 3-12-1 express, and it looks like we're going to reach our destination. So that's check mark there. You put Carry on IR. It doesn't sound like he's going to come back. You just put Stafford on IR. Those are all things that you wanted from a tanking perspective to kind of, just do, right? Because it was going to be in the best organization. It's going to be in the best interest of the organization moving forward. So from that aspect, that's the one thing that I would like to give kudos to Bob Quinn, Matt Patricia, who's ever making those decisions for in fully embracing this tank. But with that being said, I don't trust them to dig themselves out of this tank and rebuild with the the clay you're giving them from the ground up. I don't think that the sculpture that they make with the materials they have now is going to be pretty, which is why you need to get a new sculptor in and let him kind of craft his own vision. Anything short of 10 wins next year is a ticket out of town. 9-7 is not good enough. Well, 9-7 wasn't good enough when they took over. That's what we were told. That's what we were sold. And even if they lied to us, right? It's not like you went from 9 to 8 to 7, and you had tweaks that you could kind of feel better about, because just win fluctuation in the NFL is obviously going to happen. But you had 9 and then 6, and now it looks like you're going to finish the year with 3 wins, right? Maximum probably 4 if you ended up splitting the next 2 games, which is a more than, hey, it's just football type of regression. But next year, with them playing a last place schedule, again, they're one of those last place teams where other teams are looking at it saying, haha, easy win. But since you are playing a last place schedule next year, and obviously you have the 6 division games, I expect, they'll win more than 3 games. And if they don't win 10 games next year, depending on what happens in free agency and kind of how the team's shaking out. But just looking at it now, if they don't win 10 games next year, that's pretty unforgivable, especially if you're going to bring these guys back and say, hey, we trust them enough. This year was a blip because Stafford got hurt, because other players weren't on the field as much as we would have liked them. That's the only reason that you bring them back, is if you think next year they're a potential, division winner. And if that's not something that happens, then obviously you have to fire them. But for me, that's just 1 year of delaying the inevitable. That is essentially our time. Not that it was very timed, but that is what we have for you guys today. I would be remiss if I didn't go ahead and plug our podcast one more time, Sports Carnage Podcast. Make sure you check us out. We're doing a Bowl Mania special tonight. So if you guys want to watch college football and then watch at least some teams win football games, of course, do that. And we are starting a Bowl Mania bracket on ESPN. I don't know if you can just type it in. We'll go ahead and I'll see if I can put the link in the description. Actually, I can. Beautiful. So I just put the link in the description here. It doesn't look like it's popping up blue. There it is. So there's a link in the description. But if you just wanted Sports Carnage, you can go on ESPN and look up Sports Carnage podcast on the Capital One Bowl Mania. Go ahead and make your picks, and the winner will get some type of prize. It'll probably be a gift card. My guess is it'll be anywhere between like $50 to $80, somewhere around there. But you'll get a gift card, and then it's obviously free to enter. And then you get to compete with not only your fellow Detroit Sports Nation, Facebook page likers, but you also get to compete with myself, Dylan, Matt, Don Drysdale, part of Detroit Sports Nation. You get to compete with all of us to see who can pick the most bowl games right. To me, it's pretty fun. Last year our winner, they won like a $50 gift card or something. So I want to make it a little bit bigger this year. But go ahead and enter, because the bowl games, they start the 20th, and obviously you have to have your picks in before the games start. So go click that, make sure you sign up for it. Other than that, again, we are laying down our podcast tonight, and then it will be out Thursday. So make sure you go ahead and take a look at that. It'll be right before the bowls. We're going to give you all of our picks anyway. So if you wanted, you could kind of cheat and look it up and then fill your picks out after. But we'll be doing that on Thursday. And then I'm sure sometime after the new year, we'll have a more in-depth discussion than even we had today about the Lions, about Bob, Quinn, Matt, Patricia, because at that point the season will be over, the draft order will be set, and we'll just have a ton of things to end up running down, of course, as well as like the NFL playoffs, the NBA as it starts to get into kind of a more important aspect of the season, college basketball, all of that stuff. So that is what we have for you guys today. Merry Christmas. If you're not going to join me, I'll be back here before Christmas, but Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year's, Feliz Navidad, Kwanzaa, all of that. If you guys aren't able to join me for another video before the holidays. But yeah, laughing at the cat with the cone on their head. Yeah, he just got fixed yesterday. So now he's got a cone. Luckily, it's not one of the big, ugly plastic ones, but he's not a fan of it. And he just got up. So I'll probably have to play with him for a minute to get him to settle back down. But again, happy holidays to everybody out there. If you want to do more of the videos, I'll be on here for the Lions games, more Lions news if they ended up having it, Pistons games, some of the bigger Michigan and Michigan State basketball games. I've been really bad about those, but they're also just at like weird times on the weekend where I'm not at home and then I'm not able to do it. So I know you guys don't want to hear excuses, but that's my excuse. I'm sticking to it. But follow us, Twitter, Sports Carnage, Facebook, Sports Carnage Podcast. YouTube is just Sports Carnage. If you type it in, make sure you're subscribed, you're rating our podcast, you're writing reviews on them. Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you guys listen to them, you can go ahead and find us. But I'm Ryan. I'm from the Sports Carnage Podcast. That's what we have for you guys. Thank you for joining me for this 53-minute video we did here. It's the longest one we've done. So it goes to show you how angry we all were about it. But that's what we have for you guys. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day. And the video.